Senate Majority Leader Tom Bakk joins me now to talk a little bit about the special session. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So, Senator, let's begin with the special session. It is scheduled and limited just to disaster relief. Why the decision to focus only on this issue?
Well, that's been the precedent last year when Duluth and those surrounding communities had the just torrential rains, and much of the hillside of Duluth flooded and washed out. We took up a special session just on disaster relief. That really has been the precedence, is to do just disaster relief in these kind of special sessions. They've been limited to 1 day. There was some conversation early on about taking a look at repeal of the farm equipment sales tax repair. That we could have afforded to pay for. There's about $46 million on the bottom line in the state budget. So when we did the 2-year budget, we left about $46 million on the bottom line, just thinking in the event something like this comes along, there will be some money available. The farm equipment repeal would have cost about $28 million of that 46 that we left on the bottom line. So that little piece you could have done and not had to open up the entire state budget. When we got into the discussions, and the governor did propose that, when we got into the conversations with the Republican leaders, they wanted to examine more of the tax provisions than just that sales tax on farm equipment. That really would have required us to do one of two things. Either use, if we were to do that, either use a piece of the budget reserve to provide tax relief, or open up the entire state budget and try to find some additional cuts or revenue to pay for the tax relief. And really that would have greatly expanded the scope of the special session, required multiple days of a special session in order to hold the necessary committee hearings that are necessary. So I think at the end of the day, we decided that the scope of it was just getting too big, and it was best to just focus on the most important pressing needs, which were the disaster relief.
And you personally, are you a little disappointed that this farm sales tax repeal is now off the table?
Well, we could have done it. I can just tell you, just personally representing my own district, right. I did get a letter from one of our mining companies that said, hey, our sales tax is $2.9 million this year. If you're going to do it for farm equipment, what about the mining companies who are probably going to pay, probably $7 to $8 million a year in sales tax. And I've seen more and more letters coming in from groups like that. So as we kind of open that conversation and our willingness to do what we could afford to do, all of a sudden more and more people said, well, what about my provision? My part of the economy is really hurting and it would help me. And it didn't take very long for the wants to exceed what the revenue we had available to spend was. So it really was probably the best public policy also from a precedent standpoint to just limit these kind of special sessions to just the most immediate pressing need.
So, Senator, understanding that Governor Dayton is your governor, and of course you're going to support the decisions that he makes, was there any frustration that he had opened the door a little bit by even talking about repealing this farm machinery sales tax and moving away from disaster relief, or were you open to the discussion and eventually fine with the ultimate decision?
Well, I think the discussion was okay. As it turns out, the difference with the farm equipment sales tax and the other ones that were adopted, the other tax provisions that were adopted, is the members of the tax committee believe that because of just some coding issues with how taxes get quoted, there was a coding issue, and I think most people, when the conferees signed the conference committee report on the tax bill, weren't aware that the farm equipment repairs were now going to be subject to sales tax. So they really became aware of it after they had adopted the report, and it was just about how it is coded in the tax register. So I think there was a feeling among a lot of people that, well, we didn't really intend for that to happen, so maybe that's worth fixing. I think the others people pretty clearly understood were going to be enacted.
Jump ahead if you can a little bit before my last question. I just want to know, what do you think we can expect early on next session in regards to some of these tax laws?
Well, maybe before I take that on, let me just say, in a special session, if you're going to do a one-day special session, you have to, the motion is to declare an urgency and suspend the state's constitution. because the Constitution says the bills have to be heard on 3 different days before they can be voted on. I think you can arguably suspend the Constitution and declare an urgency for something like disaster relief. I think it's a bit of a stretch of an argument to go into a special session and by a supermajority of both the House and the Senate declare a statewide urgency and suspend our Constitution to take up other issues outside of the disaster relief. I don't see the urgency. Going forward, I think our ability to make any kind of modifications to this 2-year budget that we just adopted will be totally dependent on how revenues coming in compared to the forecast. People need to remember we build a 2-year budget. We make appropriations of how much we're going to spend, so we know what we're going to spend. But we make those appropriations based on forecasted revenue. So we put a 2-year state budget in place based on a February forecast, February 2013, of what we anticipated the revenue coming in was going to be. Now in November we'll get another forecast of revenue, and it will compare what they anticipated in February, now more up-to-date information on the economy, and we'll see if the revenue is coming in more or less than was projected to be. And then we'll get another one in February, probably the week that we come in, the last week of February or the early days of March, that will be the most up-to-date information on how revenue's coming in compared to what we had anticipated. So the ability to make any kind of budget adjustments, either in the area of more spending, additional tax relief, which is spending, will be totally dependent on how revenue's coming in relative to forecast. If there's additional money over what they had forecasted back last February, the legislature has a number of options at their disposal at that point. We could spend the money. We could make a decision to put the money in the state's budget reserve. We could do some additional tax relief. So
it's pretty fluid at this point.
Very much dependent on what the November and February forecast will hold.
Okay, Senator Bakk, we are out of time, but we will see you back here at the Capitol 10 a.m. September 9th for the special session.
Thank you.